Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this tutorial on Hadoop interview questions. And here we will learn about some important interview questions which will prepare you for giving an Hadoop interview. Now, here we will discuss on Hive, Pig, HBase, and these components of Hadoop which are being used in the industry for various use cases. Let's look at some questions here and let's look how you should prepare for them. So first of all, we will learn on Hive, which is a data warehousing package. So the question is, what are the different components of a Hive architecture? Now, when we talk about Hive, we already know that Hive is a data warehousing package, which basically allows you to work on structured data or data which can be structurized. So normally people are well versed with querying or basically processing the data using SQL queries. A lot of people come from database backgrounds and they would find it comfortable if they know structured query language. Hive is one of the data warehousing package which resides within a Hadoop ecosystem. It uses Hadoop's distributed file system to store the data, and it uses RDBMS usually to store the metadata, although metadata can be stored locally also. So what are the different components of an Hive architecture? So it has a user interface. So user interface calls the execute interface to the driver. This creates a session to the query, and then it sends the query to the compiler to generate an execution plan for it. Usually, whenever Hive is set up, it would have its metadata stored in an RDBMS. Now, to establish the connection between RDBMS and Hadoop, we need ODBC or JDBC connector jar file, and that connector jar file has a driver class. Now, this driver class is mandatory to create a connection between Hive and Hadoop. So user interface creates this interface using the driver. Now we have Metastore. Metastore stores the metadata information. So any object which you create, such as database, table, indexes, their metadata is stored in Metastore, and usually this Metastore is stored in an RDBMS so that multiple users can connect to Hive. So your Metastore stores the metadata information and sends that to the compiler for execution of a query. What does the compiler do? It generates the execution plan. It has a DAG. Now DAG stands for Direct Acyclic Graph. So it has a DAG of stages where each stage is either a metadata operation, a map or reduce job, or an operation on SDFS. And finally, we have execution engine that acts as a bridge between Hive and Hadoop to process the query. So execution engine communicates bidirectionally with Metastore to perform operations like create or drop tables. So these are four important components of Hive architecture. Now, what is the difference between external table and managed table in Hive? So we have various kinds of table in Hive, such as external table, managed table, partition table. The major difference between your managed and external table is in respect to what happens to the data if the table is dropped. Usually, whenever we create a table in Hive, it creates a managed table, or we could also call that as an internal table. Now this manages the data and moves it into warehouse directory by default. Whether you create a managed table or external table, usually the data can reside in Hive's default warehouse directory, or it could be residing in a location chosen. However, when we talk about managed table, if one drops a managed table, not only the metadata information is deleted, but the table's data is also deleted from SDFS. If we talk about external table, it is created with an external keyword explicitly, and if an external table is dropped, nothing happens to the data which resides in SDFS. So that's the main difference between your managed and external table. What might be the use case if somebody asks you? There might be a migration kind of activity, or you are interested in creating a lot of tables using your queries. So in that case, you could dump all the data on SDFS, and then you could create a table by pointing to a particular directory or multiple directories. Now, you could then do some testing of your tables and would decide that you might not need all the tables. So in that case, it would be advisable to create external tables so that even if the table is later dropped, the data on SDFS will be intact, unlike your managed table where dropping of table will delete the data from SDFS also. Let's learn a little bit on partition. So what is partition in Hive and why is partitioning required in Hive? If somebody asks you that. Now, normally in world of RDBMS, partition is the process to group similar type of data together. And that is usually done on basis of a column or what we call as partitioning key. Now, each table usually has one column in context of RDBMS, which could be used to partition the data. And why do we do that? So that we can avoid scanning the complete table for a query and restrict the scan to set of data or to a particular partition. In Hive, we can have any number of partition keys. So partitioning provides granularity in Hive table. It reduces the query latency by scanning only relevant partition data instead of whole data set. We can partition at various levels. Now, if I compare RDBMS with Hive, in case of RDBMS, you could have one column which could be used for partitioning, and then you could be querying the specific partition. So in case of RDBMS, your partition column is usually a part of the table definition. So for example, if I have an employee table, I might have employee ID, employee name, employee age, and employee salary as 4 columns, and I would decide to partition the table based on salary column. Now, why would I partition it? Because I feel that employee table is growing very fast. It is, or it will have huge amount of data. And later when we query the table, we don't want to scan the complete table. So I could split my data into multiple partition based on a salary column giving some ranges. In Hive, it is a little different. In Hive, you can do partitioning and there is a concept of static and dynamic partitioning. But in Hive, the partition column is not part of table definition. So you might have an employee table with employee ID, name, age, and that's it. That would be the table definition. But you could then have partitioning done based on salary column, which will then create a specific folder on SDFS. In that case, when we query the data, we can see the partition column also showing up. So we can partition the transaction data for a bank, for example, based on month like Jan, Feb, etc. And any operation regarding a particular month will then allow us to query that particular folder. That is where partitioning is useful. Now, why does Hive not store metadata information in SDFS if somebody asks you? So we know that Hive's data is stored in SDFS, which is Hadoop Distributed File System. However, the metadata is either stored locally, and that mode of Hive would be called as embedded mode, or you could have Hive's metadata stored in RDBMS so that multiple clients can initiate a connection. Now this metadata, which is very important for Hive, would not be stored in SDFS. So we already know that SDFS read and write operations are time consuming. It is a distributed file system and it can accommodate huge amount of data. So Hive stores metadata information in Metastore using RDBMS instead of SDFS. So this allows to achieve low latency and faster data access. Now, if somebody asks, what are the components used in Hive Query Processor? So usually we have the main components are your parser, your execution engine, logical plan generation, optimizer, and type checking. So whenever a query is submitted, it will go through a parser, and parser would check the syntax, it would check for objects which are being queried and other things to see if the query is fine. Now internally you have a semantic analyzer which will also look at the query. You have an execution engine which basically will work on the execution part. That is the best generated execution plan which could be used to get the results for the query. You could also have user-defined functions which a user would want to use, and these are normally created in Java or Java programming language, and then basically these user-defined functions are added to the class path. Now you would have a logical plan generation which basically looks at your query and then generates a logical plan or the best execution path which would be required to get to the results. Internally, there is a physical plan generated, which is then looked in by optimizer to get the best path to get to the data. And that might also be checking your different operators which you are using within your query. Finally, we would also have type checking. So these are important components in Hive. So somebody might ask you, if you are querying your data using Hive, what are the different components involved? Or if you could explain what are the different components which work when a query is submitted. So these are the components. Now, let's look a scenario-based question. Suppose there are a lot of small CSV files which are present in a SDFS directory, and you want to create a single Hive table from these files. So data in these files have fields like registration number, name, email, address. So if this is what needs to be done, what will be your approach to solve it? Where will you create a single Hive table for lots of small files without degrading the performance of the system? So there can be different approaches. Now we know that there are a lot of small CSV files which are present in a directory. So we know that when we create a table in Hive, we can use a location parameter. So I could say create table, give a table name, give the column and their data types. I could specify the delimiters, and finally I could say location and then point it to a directory on SDFS. And this directory might be the directory which has a lot of CSV files. So in this case, I will avoid loading the data in the table, because table pointing to the directory will directly pick up the data from one or multiple files. And we also know that Hive does schema check on read. So it does not do a schema check on write. So in case there were one or two files which did not follow the schema of the table, it would not prevent data loading. Data would anyways be loaded. Only when you query the data, it might show you null values if data which was loaded does not follow the schema of the table. This is one approach. What is the other approach? So let's look at that. You can think about sequence file format, which is basically a smart format or a binary format, and you can group these small files together to form a sequence file. Now this could be one other smarter approach. So we could create a temporary table. So we could say create table, give a table name, give the column names and their data types. We could specify the delimiters as it shows here, that is row format, and fields terminated by. And finally, we can store that as text file. Then we can load data into this table by giving a local file system path. And then we can create a table that will store data in sequence file format. So my point 1 is storing the data in text file. Point 3 would be storing the data in sequence file format. So we say create table, give the specifications. We say row format delimited. Fields are terminated by comma, stored as sequence file. Then we can move the data from test table into test sequence file table. So I could just say insert overwrite my new table as select star from other table. Remember, in Hive, you cannot do insert, update, delete. However, if the table is existing, you can do a insert overwrite from an existing table into a new table. So this could be one approach where we could have a lot of CSV files or smaller files clubbed together as one big sequence file and then store it in the table. Now, if somebody asks you, write a query to insert a new column, that is integer data type, into a Hive table, and the requirement might be that you would want to insert this table at a position before an existing column. Now that's possible by doing an alter table, giving your table name, and then specifying change column, giving your new column with the data type before an existing column. This is a simple way wherein you can insert a new column into a Hive table. What are the key differences between Hive and Pig? Now, some of you might have heard Hive is a data warehousing package and Pig is more of a scripting language. Both of them are used for data analysis, trend detection, hypothesis testing, data transformation, and many other use cases. So if we compare Hive and Pig, Hive uses a declarative language called HiveQL, that is Hive querying language, similar to SQL, and it is for reporting or for data analysis, even for data transformation or for your data extraction. Pig uses a high-level procedural language called Pig Latin, for programming. Both of them, remember, use MapReduce processing framework. So when we run a query in Hive to process the data, or when we create and submit a pig script, both of them trigger a MapReduce job unless and until we have set them to local mode. Hive operates on the server side of the cluster and basically works on structured data or data which can be structurized. Pig usually works or operates on the client side of the cluster and allows both structured, unstructured, or even I could say semi-structured data. Hive does not support Avro file format by default. However, that can be done by using the write serializer deserializer. So we can have Hive table related data stored in Avro format, in sequence file format, in Parquet format, or even as a text file format. However, when we are working on smarter formats like Avro or sequence file or Parquet, we might have to use specific serializers, deserializers. For Avro, this is the package which allows us to use Avro format. Pig supports Avro format by default. Hive was developed by Facebook and it supports partitioning, and Pig was developed by Yahoo and it does not support partitioning. So these are high level differences. There are lots and lots of differences. Remember, Hive is more of a data warehousing package and Pig is more of a scripting language or a strictly procedural flow following scripting language which allows us to process the data. Now let's get more deeper and learn about Pig, which is, as I mentioned, a scripting language which can be used for your data processing. It also uses MapReduce, although we can even have Pig run in a local mode. Let's learn about Pig in the next section. Now let's learn on some questions about Pig, which is a scripting language and it is extensively used for data processing and data analysis. So the question is, how is Apache Pig different from MapReduce? Now we all know that MapReduce is a programming model. It's quite rigid when it comes to processing the data because you have to do the mapping and reducing. You have to write huge code. Usually MapReduce is written in Java, but now it can also be written in Python. It can be written in Scala and other programming languages. So if we compare Pig with MapReduce, Pig obviously is very concise. It has less lines of code when compared to MapReduce. Now, we also know that Pig script internally will trigger a MapReduce job. However, user need not know about MapReduce programming model. They can simply write simple scripts in Pig and that will automatically be converted into MapReduce. However, MapReduce has more lines of code. Pig is high-level language which can easily perform join operations or other data processing operations. MapReduce is a low-level language which cannot perform join operations easily. So we can do join using MapReduce. However, it's not really easy in comparison to Pig. Now, as I said, on execution, every Pig operator is converted internally into a MapReduce job. So every Pig script which is run, which would be converted into MapReduce job. Now MapReduce overall is a batch oriented processing, so it takes more time to compile, it takes more time to execute, either when you run a MapReduce job or when it is triggered by Pig script. Pig works with all versions of Hadoop, and when we talk about MapReduce program, which is written in one Hadoop version, may not work with other versions. It might work or it might not. It depends on what are the dependencies, what is the compiler you're using, what programming language you have used, and what version of Hadoop you are working on. So these are the main differences between Apache Pig and MapReduce. What are the different ways of executing Pig script? So you could create a script file, store it in .pig or .text, and then you could execute it using the pig command. You could be bringing up the grunt shell, that is Pig's shell. Now that usually starts with MapReduce mode, but then we can also bring it up in a local mode, and we can also run Pig embedded as an embedded script in other programming language. So these are the different ways of executing your Pig script. Now, what are the major components of pig execution environment? This is a very common question. Interviewers would always want to know different components of Hive, different components of pig, even different components which are involved in Hadoop ecosystem. So when we want to learn about major components of pig execution environment, here are some. So you have pig scripts. Now that is written in Pig Latin using built-in operators and user-defined functions and submitted to the execution environment. That's what happens when you would want to process the data using Pig. Now there is a parser which does type checking and checks the syntax of the script. The output of parser is a DAG, direct acyclic graph. So look in Wikipedia for DAG. So DAG is basically a sequence of steps which run in one direction. Then you have an optimizer. Now this optimizer performs optimization using merge, transform, split, etc. It aims to reduce the amount of data in the pipeline. That's the whole purpose of optimizer. You have a internal compiler. So Pig compiler converts the optimized code into a MapReduce job. And here user need not know the MapReduce programming model or how it works or how it is written. They all need to know about running the Pig script, which would be internally converted into a MapReduce job. And finally, we have an execution engine. So MapReduce jobs are submitted to the execution engine to generate the desired results. So these are major components of Pig execution environment. Now, let's learn about different complex data types in Pig. Pig supports various data types. The main ones are tuple, bag, and map. What is tuple or tuple? As you might have heard, a tuple is an ordered set of fields which can contain different data types for each field. So in array, you would have multiple elements, but that would be of same types. List can also have different types. Your tuple is a collection which has different fields and each field can be of different type. Now we could have an example as 1, 3 or 1, 3, a string or a float element, and all of that form a tuple. Bag is a set of tuples. So that's represented by curly braces. So you could also imagine this like a dictionary which has various different collection elements. What is a map? Map is a set of key value pairs used to represent data. So when you work in big data field, you need to know about different data types which are supported by Pig, which are supported by Hive, which are supported in other components of Hadoop. So tuple, bag, map, array buffer. You can think about list, you can think about dictionaries, you can think about map, which is key value pair. So these are your different complex data types other than the primitive data types such as integer, character, string, boolean, float, and so on. Now, what are the various diagnostic operators available in Apache Pig? So these are some of the operators or options which you can give in a Pig script. You can do a dump. Now, dump operator runs the Pig Latin scripts and displays the result on the screen. So either I could do a dump and see the output on the screen, or I can even do a dump into and I could store my output in a particular file. So we can load the data using load operator in Pig. And then Pig also has different internal storage like JSON loader or Pig storage, which can be used if you're working on specific kind of data. And then you could do a dump either before processing or after processing, and dump would produce the result. The result could be stored in a file or seen on the screen. You also have a describe operator. Now that is used to view the schema of a relation. So you can load the data and then you can view the schema of relation using describe operator. Explain, as we might already know, displays the physical, logical, and MapReduce execution plans. So normally in RDBMS, when we use explain, we would like to see what happens behind the scenes when a particular script or a query runs. So we could load the data using load operator as in any other case. And if we would want to display the logical, physical, and MapReduce execution plans, we could use explain operator. There is also an illustrate operator. Now that gives the step-by-step execution of sequence of statements. So sometimes when we would want to analyze our script to see how good or bad they are, or would that really serve our purpose, we could use illustrate. And again, you can test that by loading the data using load operator, and you could just use a illustrate operator to have a look at the step-by-step execution of the sequence of statements which you would want to execute. So these are different diagnostic operators available in Apache Pig. Now, if somebody asks, state the usage of group, order by, and distinct keywords in Pig script. So as I said, Pig is a scripting language. So you could use various operators. So group basically collects various records with the same key and groups the data in one or more relations. Here is an example. You could do a group data. So that is basically a variable, or you can give some other name, and you can say group relation name by age. Now say I have a file where I have various fields, and one of the field is a relation name. So I could group that by a different field. Order by is used to display the contents of relation in a sorted order, whether ascending or descending. So I could create a variable called relation2, and then I could say order relation name 1 by ascending or descending order. Distinct basically removes the duplicate records, and it is implemented only on entire records, not on individual records. So if you would want to find out the distinct values and relation name field, I could use distinct. What are the relational operators in Pig? So you have various relational operators which help data scientists or data analysts or developers who are analyzing the data, such as cogroup, which joins two or more tables and then performs group operation on the join table result. You have cross. It is used to compute the cross product, that is a Cartesian product of two or more relations. For each is basically to do some iteration. So if it will iterate through tuples of a relation, generating a data transformation. So for example, if I say variable a equals, and then I load a file in a, and then I could create a variable called b, where I could say for each a, I would want to do something, say group. Join is to join two or more tables in a relation. Limit is to limit the number of output tuples or output results. Split is to split the relation into two or more relations. Union is to get a combination, that's it will merge the contents of two or more relations. And order is to get a sorted result. So these are some relational operators which are extensively used in Pig for analysis. What is the use of having filters in Apache Pig? Now, say for example, I have some data which has three fields: year, product, quantity, and this is my phone sales data. So filter operator could be used to select the required values from a relation based on a condition. It also allows you to remove unwanted records from data file. So for example, filter the products where quantity is greater than 1000. So I see that I have one row wherein, or multiple rows where the quantity is greater than 1000, such as 1500, 1700, 1200. So I could create a variable called a. I would load my file using Pig storage. As I explained earlier, Pig storage is an internal parameter which can be used to specify the delimiters. Now here my delimiter is comma. So I could say using Pig storage as, and then I could specify the data type for each field. So year being integer, product being character array, and quantity being integer. Then B, I could say filter A, whatever we have in A, by quantity greater than 1000. So it's very concise, it's very simple, and it allows us to extract and process data in a simpler way. Now, suppose there is a file called test.txt having 150 records in SDFS. So this is a file which is stored on SDFS, and it has 150 records, where we can consider every record being one line. And if somebody asks you to write a Pig command to retrieve the first 10 records of the file, first we will have to load the data. So I could create a variable called test_data, and I would say load my file using Pig storage, specifying the delimiter as comma, as, and then I could specify my fields, whatever fields our file have. And then I would want to get only 10 records, for which I could use the limit operator. So I could say limit on test data and give me 10 records. This is very simple, and we can extract 10 records from 150 records which are stored in the file on SDFS. Now, we have learned on Pig we have learned some questions on Hive. You could always look more in books like Programming in Hive or Programming in Pig and look for some more examples and try out these examples on a existing Hadoop setup. Now let's learn on HBase, which is a NoSQL database. Now HBase is a 4-dimensional database in comparison to your RDBMS, which usually are 2-dimensional. So RDBMS have rows and columns, but HBase has 4 coordinates. It has row key, which is always unique, column family, which can be any number, column qualifiers, which can again be any number per column family, and then you have a version. So these 4 coordinates make HBase a 4-dimensional key value store or a column family store, which is unique for storing huge amount of data and extracting data from HBase. There is a very good link which I would suggest everyone can look at if you would want to learn more on HBase, and you could just say HBase mapper, and this basically brings up a documentation which is from MapR, but then that's not specific to MapR. And you can look at this link, which will give you a detailed explanation of HBase, how it works, what are the architectural components, and how data is stored, and how it makes HBase a very powerful NoSQL database. So let's learn on some of the important or critical questions on HBase which might be asked by the interviewer in an interview when you're applying for a big data admin or a developer position role. So what are the key components of HBase? Now, as I said, this is one of the favorite questions of interviewers where they would want to understand your knowledge on different components for a particular service. HBase, as I said, is a NoSQL database, and that comes as a part of service with Cloudera or Hortonworks. And with Apache Hadoop, you could also set up HBase as an independent package. So what are the key components of HBase? HBase has a region server. Now, HBase follows the similar kind of topology like Hadoop. Now, Hadoop has a master process that is name node and slave processes such as data nodes and secondary name node. In the same way, HBase also has a master, which is HMaster, and the slave processes are called region servers. So these region servers are usually co-located with data nodes. However, it is not mandatory that if you have 100 data nodes, you would have 100 region servers. So it purely depends on admin. So what does this region server contain? So region server contains HBase tables that are divided horizontally into regions. Or you could say group of rows is called regions. So in HBase, you have 2 aspects. One is group of columns, which is called column family, and one is group of rows, which is called regions. Now these regions or these rows are grouped based on the key values, or I would say row keys, which are always unique. When you store your data in HBase, you would have data in the form of rows and columns. So group of rows are called regions, or you could say these are horizontal partitions of the table. So a region server manages these regions on the node where a data node is running. A region server can have up to 1,000 regions. It runs on every node and decides the size of region. So region server, as I said, is a slave process which is responsible for managing HBase data on the node. Each region server is a worker node or a worker process co-located with data node, which will take care of your read, write, update, delete request from the clients. Now, when we talk about more components of HBase, as I said, you have HMaster. So you would always have a connection coming in from a client or an application. What does HMaster do? It assigns regions. It monitors the region servers. It assigns regions to region servers for load balancing, and it cannot do that without the help of Zookeeper. So if we talk about components of HBase, there are 3 main components. You have Zookeeper, you have HMaster, and you have region server. Region server being the slave process, your HMaster being the master process, which takes care of all your table operations, assigning regions to the region servers, taking care of read and write requests which come from client, And for all of this, HMaster will take in help of Zookeeper, which is a centralized coordination service. So whenever a client wants to read or write or change the schema or any other metadata operations, it will contact HMaster. HMaster internally will contact Zookeeper. So you could have HBase set up also in high availability mode, where you could have a active HMaster and a backup HMaster. You would have a Zookeeper quorum, which is the way Zookeeper works. So Zookeeper is a centralized coordination service which will always run with a quorum of processes. So Zookeeper would always run with odd number of processes such as 3, 5, and 7, because Zookeeper works on the concept of majority consensus. Now Zookeeper, which is a centralized coordination service, is keeping a track of all the servers which are alive, available, and also keeps a track of their status. For every server which Zookeeper is monitoring, Zookeeper keeps a session alive with that particular server. HMaster would always check with Zookeeper which region servers are available, alive, so that regions can be assigned to the region server. At one end, you have region server which are sending their status to the Zookeeper, indicating if they are ready for any kind of read or write operation. And at other end, HMaster is querying the Zookeeper to check the status. Now Zookeeper internally manages a meta table. Now that meta table will have information of which regions are residing on which region server and what row keys those regions contain. So in case of a read activity, HMaster will query Zookeeper to find out the region server which contains that meta table. Once HMaster gets the information of meta table, it can look into the meta table to find out the row keys and the corresponding region servers which contain the regions for those row keys. Now, if we would want to understand row key and column families in HBase, let's look at this, and it would be good if we could look this on an Excel sheet. So row key is always unique. It acts as a primary key for any HBase table. It allows logical grouping of cells and makes sure that all cells with the same row key are co-located on the same server. So as I said, you have 4 coordinates for HBase. You have a row key, which is always unique. You have column families, which is nothing but group of columns. And when I say column families, one column family can have any number of columns. So when I talk about HBase, HBase is 4-dimensional, and in terms of HBase, it is also called as a column-oriented database, which basically means that every row in one column could have a different data type. Now, you have a row key, which uniquely identifies the row. You have column families, which could be one or many, depending on how the table has been defined. And a column family can have any number of columns. Or I could say, for every row within a column family, you could have different number of columns. So I could say for my row 1, I could just have 2 columns such as name and city within the column family. For my row 2, I could have name, city, age, designation, salary. For my third row, I could have 1,000 columns, and all that could belong to one column family. So this is a horizontally scalable database. So column family consists of group of columns which is defined during table creation, and each column family can have any number of column qualifiers separated by a delimiter. Now, a combination of row key, column family, column qualifier such as name, city, age, and the value within the cell makes the HBase a unique 4-dimensional database. For more information, if you would want to learn on HBase, please refer this link, which is HBase Mapper, and this gives a complete HBase architecture. That is 3 components of name node, 3 components, that is name node, region servers, and Zookeeper, how it works, how HMaster interacts with Zookeeper, what Zookeeper does in coordination, how are the components working together, and how does HBase take care of read and write. Coming back and continuing, why do we need to disable a table? So there are different table operations what you can do in HBase, and one of them is disabling a table. Now if you would want to check the status of table, you could check that by is disabled and giving the table name, or is enabled and the table name. So the question is, why do we need to disable a table? Now, if we would want to modify a table, or we are doing some kind of maintenance activity, in that case, we can disable the table so that we can modify or change its settings. When a table is disabled, it cannot be accessed through the scan command. Now, if we have to write a code to open a connection in HBase, now to interact with HBase, one could either use a graphical user interface such as Hue, or you could be using the command line HBase shell, or you could be using HBase admin API if you are working with Java, or say HappyBase if you are working with Python, where you may want to open a connection with HBase so that you can work with HBase programmatically. In that case, we have to create a configuration object, that is configuration myconf, and then create a configuration object. And then you can use different classes like HTable interface to work on a new table. You could use HColumn qualifier and many other classes which are available in HBase admin API. What does replication mean in terms of HBase? So HBase, as I said, works in a cluster way. And when you talk about cluster, you could always set up a replication from one HBase cluster to other HBase cluster. So this replication feature in HBase provides a mechanism to copy data between clusters or sync the data between different clusters. This feature can be used as a disaster recovery solution that provides high availability for HBase. So if I have HBase cluster 1, where I have one master and multiple region servers running in a Hadoop cluster, I could use the same Hadoop cluster to create a HBase replica cluster, or I could have a totally different HBase replica cluster where my intention is that if things are changing in a particular table in cluster 1, I would want them to be replicated across different clusters. So I could alter the HBase table and set the replication scope to 1. Now, a replication scope of 0 indicates that table is not replicated. But if we set the replication to 1, we basically will have to set up a HBase cluster where we can replicate HBase tables data from cluster 1 to cluster. So these are the commands which can be used to enable replication and then replicate the data of table across clusters. Can we import and export in HBase? Of course we can. It is possible to import and export tables from one HBase cluster to other HBase cluster, or even within a cluster. So we can use the HBase export utility, which comes in this particular package. Give a table name and then a target location. So that will export the data of a HBase table into a directory on HDFS. Then I could create a different table which would follow some kind of same definition as the table which was exported, and then I could use import to import the data from the directory on HDFS to my table. If you would want to learn more on HBase import and export, you could look at HBase import operations. Let's search for the link, and this is the link where you could learn more about HBase import export utilities, how you could do a bulk import, bulk export, which internally uses MapReduce, and then you could do a import and export into HBase tables. Moving further, what do we mean by compaction in HBase? Now, we all know that HBase is a NoSQL database which can be used to store huge amount of data. However, whenever a data is written in HBase, it is first written to what we call as write ahead log, and also to memstore, which is write cache. Now, once the data is written in WAL and your memstore, it is offloaded to form an internal HBase format file, which is called H file. And usually these H files are very small in nature. So we also know that HDFS is good when we talk about few number of larger files in comparison to large number of smaller files due to the limitation of name nodes memory. Compaction is process of merging HBase files, that is these smaller H files, into a single large file. This is done to reduce the amount of memory required to store the files and number of disk seeks needed. So we could have a lot of H files which get created when the data is written to HBase, and these smaller files can then be compacted through a major or minor compaction, creating one big H file, which internally would then be written to HDFS and HDFS format of blocks. That is the benefit of compaction. There is also a feature called Bloom filter. So how does Bloom filter work? So Bloom filter or HBase Bloom filter is a mechanism to test whether a H file contains a specific row or a row column cell. Bloom filter is named after its creator Burton Howard Bloom. It is a data structure which predicts whether a given element is a member of a set of data. It provides an in-memory index structure that reduces the disk reads and determines the probability of finding a row in a particular file. This is one of very useful features of HBase, which allows for faster access and avoids disk seeks. Does HBase have any concept of namespace? So namespace is when you have similar elements grouped together. So namespace, yes, HBase supports namespace. So namespace is a logical grouping of tables, analogous to a database in RDBMS. So you can create HBase namespace to the schema of RDBMS database. So you could create a namespace by saying create namespace and giving it a name. And then you could also list the tables within a namespace. You could create tables within a specific namespace. Now this is usually done in production environment where a cluster might be multi-tenant cluster and there might be different users of the same NoSQL database. In that case, admin would create specific namespace, and for specific namespace you would have different directories on HDFS, and users of a particular business unit or a team can work on their HBase objects within a specific namespace. This is a question which is again very important to understand about the writes or reads. So how does write ahead log WAL help when a region server crashes? Now, as I said, when a write happens, it will happen into memstore and WAL, that is your edit log or write ahead log. So whenever a write happens, it will happen in two places, memstore, which is the write cache, and WAL, which is a edit log. Only when the data is written in both these places and based on the limitation of memstore, the data will be flushed to create an HBase format file called hfile. These files are then compacted and created into one bigger file, which will then be stored on HDFS. And HDFS data, as we know, is stored in the form of blocks on the underlying data nodes. So if a region server hosting a memstore crashes, now where is region server running? That would be co-located with data node. So if a data node crashes, or if a region server which was hosting the memstore write cache crashes, data in memory, the data that in memory which was not persisted, is lost. Now, how does HBase recover from this? As I said, your data is written into WAL and memstore at the same time. HBase recovers against that by writing to WAL before the write completes. So whenever a write happens, it happens in memstore and WAL at the same time. HBase cluster keeps a WAL to record changes as they happen, and that's why we call it as also an edit log. If HBase goes down or the node that goes down, the data that was not flushed from memstore to hfile can be recovered by replaying the write ahead log, and that's the benefit of your edit log or write ahead log. Now, if we would have to write HBase command to list the contents and update the column families of a table, I could just do a scan and that would give me complete data of a table. If you are very specific and if you would want to look at a particular row, then you could do a get table name and then give the row key. However, you could do a scan to get the complete data of a particular table. You could also do a describe to see what are the different column families. And if you would want to alter the table and add a new column family, it is very simple. You can just say alter, give the HBase table name, and then give your new column family name, which will then be added to the table. What are catalog tables in HBase? So as I mentioned, your Zookeeper knows the location of this internal catalog table, or what we call as the meta table. Now, catalog tables in HBase have two tables. One is HBase meta table and one is -root. The catalog table HBase meta exists as an HBase table and is filtered out of HBase shell's list command. So if I give a list command on HBase, it would list all the tables which HBase contains, but not the meta table. It's an internal table. This meta table keeps a list of all regions in the system and location of HBase meta stored in Zookeeper. So if somebody wants to find out or look for particular rows, they need to know the regions which contain that data, and those regions are located on region server. To get all this information, one has to look into this meta table. However, we will not be looking into meta table directly. We would just be giving a write or a read operation. Internally, your HBase master queries the Zookeeper. Zookeeper has the information of where the meta table exists, and that meta table which is existing on region server contains information of row keys and the region servers where those rows can be found. Your root table keeps a track of location of the meta table. What is hotspotting in HBase and how to avoid hotspotting? Now, this is a common problem, and always admin guys or guys who are managing the infrastructure would think about it. So one of the main idea is that HBase would be leveraging the benefit of HDFS. Your all read and write requests should be uniformly distributed across all of the regions and region servers. Otherwise, what's the benefit of having a distributed cluster? So you would have your data stored across region servers in the form of regions, which are horizontal partitions of the table. And whenever read and write requests happen, they should be uniformly distributed across all the regions in the region servers. Now, hotspotting occurs when a given region serviced by a region server receives most or all of read and write requests, which is basically a unbalanced way of read-write operations. Now, hotspot can be avoided by designing the row key in such a way that data being written should go to multiple regions across the cluster. So you could do techniques such as salting, hashing, reversing the key, and many other techniques which are employed by users of HBase. We need to just make sure that when the regions are distributed across region servers, they should be spread across region servers so that your read and write request can be satisfied from different region servers in parallel, rather than all read and write requests hitting the same region server, overloading the region server, which may also lead to the crashing of a particular region server. So these were some of the important questions of HBase, and then there are many more. Please refer to the link which I specified during my discussion, and that gives you a detailed explanation of how HBase works. You can also look into HBase Definitive Guide by O'Reilly or HBase in Action, and these are really good books to understand about HBase internals and how it works. Now that we have learned on Hive, which is a data warehousing package, we have learned on Pig, which is a scripting or a scripting language which allows you to do data analysis, and we have learned some questions on a NoSQL database. Just note it that there are more than 225 NoSQL databases existing in market. And if you would want to learn and know about more NoSQL databases, you can just go to Google and type NoSQL databases.org, and that will take you to the link which is for NoSQL databases, and this shows there are more than 225 NoSQL databases existing in market, and these are for different use cases used by different users and with different features. So have a look at this link. Now, when you talk about data ingestion, so let's look at data ingestion, and this is one good link which I would suggest to have a look at, which lists down around 18 different ingestion tools. So when you talk about different data ingestion tools, some are for structured data, some are for streaming data, some are for data governance, some are for data ingestion and transformation, and so on. So have a look at this link, which also gives you a comparison of different data ingestion tools. So here, let's learn about some questions on Sqoop, which is one of the data ingestion tools mainly used for structured data, or you could say data which is coming in from RDBMS or data which is already structured, and you would want to ingest that. You would want to store that on HDFS, which could then be used for Hive, which could be used for any kind of processing using MapReduce or Hive or Pig or Spark or any other processing frameworks, or you would want to load that data into, say, Hive or HBase tables. Scoop is mainly for structured data. It is extensively used when organizations are migrating from RDBMS to a big data platform, and they would be interested in ingesting the data, that is doing import and export of data from RDBMS to SDFS or vice versa. So let's learn about some important questions on Scoop which you may be asked by an interviewer when you apply for a big data related position. How is Scoop different from Flume? So this is a very common question which is asked. Scoop, which is mainly for structured data. So Scoop works with RDBMS. It also works with NoSQL databases to import and export data. So you can import data into SDFS. You can import data into data warehousing packets such as Hive directly or also in HBase. And you could also export data from Hadoop ecosystem to your RDBMS. However, when it comes to Flume, Flume is more of a data ingestion tool which works with streaming data or unstructured data. So data which is constantly getting generated, for example, log files or metrics from server or some chat messenger and so on. So if you're interested in working on capturing and storing the streaming data in a storage layer such as SDFS or HBase, you could be using Flume. There could be other tools also like Kafka or Storm or Chukwa or Samza, NiFi, and so on. Scoop, however, is mainly for structured data. Your loading data in Scoop is not event driven, so it is not based on event. It basically works on data which is already stored in RDBMS. In terms of Flume, it is completely event driven. That is, as the messages or as the events happen, as the data is getting generated, you can have that data ingested using Flume. Scoop works with structured data sources, and you have various Scoop connectors which are used to fetch data from external data structures or RDBMS. So for every RDBMS such as MySQL, Oracle, DB2, Microsoft SQL Server, you have different connectors which are available. Flume, it works on fetching streaming data such as tweets or log files or server metrics from your different sources where the data is getting generated. And if you are interested in not only ingesting that data, which is getting generated in a streaming fashion, but if you would be interested in processing the data as it arrives, Scoop can import data from RDBMS onto SDFS and also export it back to RDBMS. Flume is then used for streaming data. Now you could have one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-one kind of relation. So in terms of Flume, you have components such as your source, sink, and channel. That's the main difference between your Scoop and Flume. What are the different file formats to import data using Scoop? Well, there are lots and lots of formats in which you can import data into Scoop. When you talk about Scoop, you can have delimited text file format. Now that's the default import format. It can be specified explicitly using as text file argument. So when I want to import data from an RDBMS, I could get that data in SDFS using different compression schemes or in different formats using the specific arguments. So I could specify an argument which will write string-based representation of each record to output files with delimiters between individual columns and rows. So that is the default format which is used to import data using Scoop. So to learn more about your Scoop and different arguments which are available, you can click on scoop.apache.org. You can look into the documentation, and I would suggest choosing one of the versions and looking into the user guide. And here you can search for arguments and look for specific control arguments which show how you can import data using Scoop. So here we have common arguments, and then you also have import control arguments, wherein we have different options like getting data as Avro, as sequence file, as text file, or Parquet file. These are different formats. You can also get data in default compression scheme, that is gzip, or you can specify compression codec, and then you can specify what compression mechanism you would want to use when you're importing your data using Scoop. When it comes to default format for Flume, we could say sequence file, which is a binary format that stores individual records in record specific data types. So these data types are manifested as Java classes, and Scoop will automatically generate these data types for you. So Scoop does that. When we talk about your sequence file format in terms of your Scoop, you could be extracting storage of all data in binary representation. So as I mentioned, you can import data in different formats such as Avro, Parquet, sequence file, that is binary format or machine readable format. And then you could also have data in different compression schemes. Let me just show you some quick examples here. So if I look in the content, and here I could search for a Scoop based file where I have listed down some examples. So if I would want to use different compression schemes, here are some examples. Have a look at these. So I'm doing a Scoop import. I'm also giving an argument so that Scoop, which also triggers a map reduce job, or I would say map only job. So when you run a Scoop import, it triggers a map only job. No reduce happens here. And you could specify this parameter or this argument on the command line mapreduce.framework.name so that you could run your map only job in a local mode to save time, or that would interact with Yarn and run a full-fledged map only job. We can give the connection and then connect to whatever RDBMS we are connecting, mentioning the database name, give your username and password, give the table name, give a target directory, or it would create a directory same as the table name, which would work only once. And then I could say -z to get data in a compressed format, that is gzip, or I could be specifying compression codec, and then I could specify what compression codec I would want to use, say Snappy, bzip, LZ4, default. I could also run a query by giving a Scoop import. And when I'm specifying a query, if you notice, I've not given any table name because that would be included in the query. I can get my data as a sequence file format, which is a binary format, which will create a huge file. So we could also have compression enabled. And then I could say the output of my map job should use a compression at record level for my data coming in sequence file. So sequence file or a binary format supports compression at record level or at block level. I could get my data in an Avro file where data has embedded schema within the file, or a Parquet file also. So these are different ways in which you can set up different compression schemes, or you can even get data in different formats, and you could be doing a simple Scoop import for these. Looking further, what is the importance of eval tool in Scoop? So there is something called as eval tool. So Scoop eval tool allows users to execute user-defined queries against respective database servers and preview the result in the console. So either I could be running a straight away query to import the data into my HDFS, or I could just use Scoop eval, connect to my external RDBMS, specify my username and password, and then I could be giving in a query to see what would be the result of the query which we intend to import. Now, let's learn about how Scoop imports and exports data between RDBMS and HDFS with its architecture. So RDBMS, as we know, has your database structures, your tables, which all of them are logical. And internally, there is always metadata which is stored. Your Scoop import connects to an external RDBMS, and for this connection, it uses an internal connector jar file which has a driver class. So that's something which needs to be set up by admin, but they need to make sure that whichever RDBMS you intend to connect to, they need to have the JDBC connector for that particular RDBMS stored within the Scoop lib folder. So Scoop import gets the metadata, and then for your Scoop command, it converts that into a map only job, which might have one or multiple map tasks. Now that depends on your Scoop command. You could be specifying that you would want to do a import only in one task, or in multiple tasks. These multiple map tasks will then run on a section of data from RDBMS and then store it in SDFS. So at high level, we could say Scoop will introspect database to gather the metadata. It divides the input data set into splits, and this division of data into splits mainly happens on primary key column of the table. Now, if somebody might ask, what if my table in RDBMS does not have a primary key column? Then when you're doing a Scoop import, either you will have to import it using one mapper task by specifying -m equals 1, or you would have to say split by parameter to specify a numeric column from RDBMS. And that's how you can import the data. Let me just show you a quick example on this. So I could just look in again into the Scoop command file, and here we could be looking at an example. So if you see this one, here we are specifying -m equals 1, which basically means I would want to import the data using one map task. Now in this case, whether the table has a primary key column or does not have a primary key column will not matter. But if I say a -MS6, where I'm specifying multiple map tasks to be imported, then this will look for a primary key column in the table which you are importing. Now, if the table does not have a primary key column, then I could be specifying a split by and then specify the column so that the data could be split into multiple chunks and multiple map tasks could take it. Now, if the second scenario is your table does not have a primary key column and it does not have a numeric column on which you could do a split by, in that case, and if you would want to use multiple mappers, you could still say split by on a textual column, but you will have to add this property so that it allows splitting the data which is non-numeric. All of these options are given in the scoopapache.org link. Going further, how Scoop imports and exports data between RDBMS and SDFS with its architecture. So as I said, it submits the map only job to the cluster, and then it basically does a import or export. So if we are exporting the data from SDFS, in that case, again, there would be a map only job. It would look at multiple splits of the data which is existing, which your map only job would process through one or multiple map task and then export it to RDBMS. Suppose you have a database testDB in MySQL. If somebody asked you to write a command to connect this database and import tables to Scoop. So here is a quick example as I showed you in the command file. So you could say Scoop import. This is what we would want to do. You connect using JDBC. Now this will only work if the JDBC connector already exists within your Scoop lib directory. Admin has to set up that, so you can connect to your RDBMS. You can point to the database. So here our database name is test_db. I could give username, and then either I could give password on the command line or just say capital P so that I could be prompted for the password, and then I could give the table name which I would want to import. I could also be specifying -m and specify how many map tasks do I want to use for this import, as I showed in previous screen. How to export a table back to RDBMS? Now for this, we need the data in a directory on HDFS. So for example, there is a departments table in retail database, which is already imported into Scoop, and you need to export this table back to RDBMS. So this is the content of the table. Now create a new department table in RDBMS. So I could create a table specifying the column names, whether that supports null or no, if that has a primary key column, which is always recommended. And then I can do a Scoop export. I can connect to the RDBMS, specifying my username and password, specify the table into which you want to export the data, and then you give export directory pointing to a directory on HDFS which contains the data. This is how you can export data into table. Seeing example on this. So I could again look into my file, and here I have an example of import. This is where you are importing data directly into Hive, and you have Scoop import where you are importing data directly into HBase table, and you can then query your HBase table to look at the data. You could also do a export by running your map only job in a local mode, connecting to the RDBMS, specifying your username, specifying the table where you would want to export, and the directory on STFS where you have kept the relevant data. This is a simple example of export. Looking further, what is the role of JDBC driver in Sqoop setup? So as I said, if you would want to use Sqoop to connect to an external RDBMS, we need the JDBC ODBC connector jar file. Now, one or admin could download the JDBC connector jar file and then place the jar file within the Sqoop lib directory wherever Sqoop is installed. And this JDBC connector jar file contains a driver. Now, JDBC driver is a standard Java API which is used for accessing different databases in RDBMS. So this connector jar file is very much required, and this connector jar file has a driver class, and this driver class enables the connection between your RDBMS and your Hadoop structure. Each database vendor is responsible for writing their own implementation that will allow communication with the corresponding database, and we need to download the drivers which allow our Sqoop to connect to external RDBMS. So your JDBC driver alone is not enough to connect to Sqoop. We also need connectors to interact with different databases. So a connector is a pluggable piece that is used to fetch metadata and allow Sqoop to overcome the differences in SQL dialects. So this is how connection can be established. So normally your admins would, when they are setting up Sqoop and Hadoop, they would download, say, MySQL JDBC connector, and this is how they would go to the MySQL connectors. If you are connecting to MySQL, similarly for your other RDBMS, you could be, say, going in here, you could be looking for a previous version, depending, you could be going for platform independent, and then you could be downloading the connector jar file. Now, if you untar this jar file, you would see a MySQL connector jar. And if we look in com.mysql.jdbc, com.mysql.jdbc.driver. So this is the package which is within the connector jar file, and this has the driver class which allows the connection of your Sqoop with your RDBMS. So these things will have to be done by your admin so that you can have your Sqoop connecting to an external RDBMS. Now, how do you update the columns that are already exported? So if I do a export and I put my data in RDBMS, can I really update the columns that are already exported? Yes, I can, using a update key parameter. So Sqoop export command remains the same. The only thing I will have to specify now is the table name, your fields terminated by if you have a specific delimiter, and then you can say update key and then the column name. So this allows us to update the columns that are already exported in RDBMS. What is CodeGen? So Sqoop commands translate into your MapReduce job or map only job. So CodeGen is basically a tool in Sqoop that generates data access objects, DAO, Java classes that encapsulate and interpret imported records. So if I do a Sqoop CodeGen connect to an RDBMS using my username and give a table, this will generate a Java code for employee table in the test database. So this CodeGen can be useful for us to understand what data we have in this particular table. Finally, can Sqoop be used to convert data in different formats? I think I already answered that, right? If no, which tools can be used for this purpose? So Sqoop can be used to convert data in different formats, and that depends on the different arguments which you use when you do a import, such as Avro file, Parquet file, binary format with record or block level compression. So if you're interested in knowing more on different data formats, then I think I can suggest a link for that, and we can say Hadoop formats. I think it is tech Maggie, Avro, Parquet. Let's see if we can find out the link. Tech Maggie. Yeah, this is a very good link which specifies or talks about different data formats which you should know, such as your text file format, different compression schemes, how is data organization, what are the common formats, what do you have in text file, structured, binary, sequence files with compression, without compression, what is record level, what is block level, what is a Avro data file, what is a sequence, what is a Parquet data file or a columnar format, and other formats like ORC, RC, and so on. So please have a look at this link. So here we have learned on some important questions on your Hive, which is a data warehousing package, HBase, which is a NoSQL database, Pig, which is a scripting language used for data processing and analysis, and Scoop, which is used for ingestion of structured data. Thank you and keep learning.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.